Hello, welcome to this edition of the umgoblue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer.
Start off with this. Obviously, very disappointed in the result. Credit to them and how they played and how they executed. We did not to our standard. Started off fast. Thought we started off with good rhythm offensively. Defensively, held them to a big goal line stand. Held them to field goals, but we didn't execute in the red zone, which ended up being the story of the game. And then the second half, not being able to, get a rhythm offensively. They did a good job, and credit to them. There's no excuse for it. We gotta be much better, and they outplayed us today. So got a lot to work on.
and we're going to talk about the thumping that Michigan took at the hands of the Ohio State Buckeyes, falling at the Big House to a score of 27-9. Well, Clint, what did you think about that one?
I mean, it was painful to watch for sure, um, because it hurts to lose a rivalry game. But the dynamic of this particular rivalry has been Michigan was able to win with many times a less talented team because they were tougher physically, mentally in the game. And while Michigan got off to a pretty solid start, and it looked like maybe that dynamic was going to stick for a fifth straight year. I think Ohio State proved that they've kind of addressed that issue, both physically and mentally. The Buckeyes were tougher than Michigan on Saturday, and um, the score ended up being about what you would expect for what we saw in the metrics. So you got to kind of tip your cap to Ohio State. They are the number one team in the country, and certainly have addressed the weaknesses that they've had over the last 4 years. But more interesting for us, of course, is where does Michigan go from here? I think it was right at for a season. It was right what I expected at 9-3, but that means that it's even more important to have a really great bowl season here, bowl prep, and get into the off season and be ready to kind of take the next step forward, because we don't want to see another season just like this.
Well, Clint, you hear me say it, and I think you agree with it. It's not just the loss, it's how you lost, okay? And it's not like Michigan played a great game here and just came up short. The issue that I had is it looked a lot like their previous losses this season. And the issue I have with that on a larger level is when Michigan has played better teams, they don't play well. And, I look back, Michigan scored 9 points against Ohio State, 13 points against USC, and 13 points against Oklahoma. And those games, we're like, well, you can dress those up. Michigan's road game, Oklahoma, okay. Michigan's road game, USC, okay. This happened at the Big House. And the frustrating thing for me is that in the first quarter, for much of the first quarter, everything went Michigan's way, and everything was gearing up to play into the idea that Ohio State just bad things happen to Ohio State, right? When they play Michigan, you had this thing where, you know, Michigan basically was winning 6-0, but again, couldn't take advantage of the momentum, right? Couldn't score a touchdown, got the field goal, got the interception, and when it's 6-0, it's really easy for the momentum to swing back. I mean, you can dominate, but if you only got 6 points on the scoreboard, and then Ohio State runs down the field, and Michigan stops them twice, and Michigan gives them new life with a really unfortunate penalty. So it's still 6-3, and you're thinking, all right, things are great. Michigan can still take advantage. But Ohio State came back, scored 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, and really the nail in the coffin was that touchdown right before the half. And as we saw in Michigan's previous losses, that happens, right? And when that happens, it seems like the air goes out of whatever uh, whatever hope that Michigan had. And I hate to say it, but really, it was 17-9 at halftime, and it felt like it was over. Ohio State scored and then was getting the ball back in the third quarter, and it just felt like that. When you can't score, you can't win. Okay, so it's 17-9 at halftime, but it felt much bigger, and Ohio State just did what Michigan used to do to teams, basically just put them in that, like the python, and just choked them out. Just shut them out in the second half, and Michigan falls 27-9.
Yeah, so Michigan ran 18 plays in the second half total for 59 yards. Ohio State had a 20 play, 80 something yard field goal drive, one drive. I mean, that's it. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. The success rate by quarter for Michigan, 38% to start, pretty much a tie with what we saw from Ohio State. Second quarter, 30% success rate, 18% success rate in the third quarter, which I thought was going to be pivotal. If we go back to our pregame conversation, they come out of halftime and can only run 11 plays for 60 yards. And then in the fourth quarter, 0% efficiency rate, no successful plays, not one. They only ran 7 plays in the fourth quarter, but none of them were successful. That's it. It's a total butt kicking, and there's no two ways around it. It was not good enough on offense. Now defensively, it wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination. You gave up a 52% success rate and 6 yards per play, but the opposite of complementary football can really hurt your defense. When you can't move the sticks and give your defense a break, it's going to be tough. Holding that Ohio State team under 30 points is not bad. Not bad, not awful for sure. Certainly not the worst performance that we saw out of the defense on the season, but their mediocre to poor performance was completely drowned out by just an abysmal performance by the offense. And again, I chalk a lot of this up still to a true freshman quarterback. And we knew we were going to take some lumps this season because of the lack of experience at quarterback. And this is one of the lumps. You take it and move on, because I'm glad that Bryce Underwood is our quarterback and that he's a freshman. He's got 2 more years to grow in this system, and he's going to continue to improve, and the offense is going to grow right alongside him. This is just one of those lumps that we have to take. It wasn't good enough, and hopefully he got to work right away on trying to learn from the film that we're going to see against a really, really good Ohio State defense.
So the disappointing thing for me, besides the huge loss, was that it really seemed that Michigan's offense was coming into its own heading into this game. I said in the last podcast, I really thought that Michigan was an extremely dangerous team at this point in the season, because we were seeing the offense be able to throw. We were seeing the offense be able to play complementary between the run and the pass. And that just completely disappeared in this game. Now, definitely we had some weirdness going on, okay? And it's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. We had Ernest Hausman just go MIA, right? So that definitely hurt the defense. We also had Jordan Marshall get hurt. He starts off the game with a great run, and you're thinking, oh, we're going to run all over Ohio State. He gets dinged up and then doesn't come back till later. So between Justice Haynes being injured, between Jordan Marshall being injured, you just had this feeling that the injuries and the losses of players were just adding up, and at a certain point, it was just too much to overcome.
I mean, the way that it started out, with Michigan having some success in the ground game to start, I mean, a 36-yard run on the first snap of the game, it was clear they had a game plan that was viable to start the game, right? But they could not get Bryce Underwood comfortable enough and calm enough to execute. I thought that there were a couple of good plays called early on that Bryce just looked a little bit anxious and that he rushed it. It looked like they were and quarterback runs, as we said in the pregame podcast, that you got to let him go now. What are you saving Bryce Underwood for, if not the Ohio State game? So they called a couple of those runs that were fake screens, and then a quarterback run to the other side, and it just looked to me like Bryce couldn't quite commit to the fake. Right, he couldn't make it look like a passing play, be patient, and then take off running. He was just anxious, and we saw the jittery feet again in the pocket, and we saw him go through his reads, his progression, um, quick enough that he could not see a guy that was coming open. Right, there were receivers who were open in this game. The line did a pretty good job of protecting Bryce Underwood for the most part. All right, again, not perfect, but certainly good enough for him to stand in there confidently and take some of the shots down the field that were there and that were called. And more times than not, Bryce, checked down or forced a throw that wasn't there. It was the wrong decision. So again, I'm not complaining. I think he had a pretty solid freshman season. A lot to build on, but in this game, he was overmatched, and I think, knowing the competitor that Bryce Underwood is, I think he's going to springboard from this performance forward, because now he's got a taste of what it takes and what level he's got to be able to play at in order to win this game. And if Michigan is good enough to win this game, we know that they're good enough to win the conference championship, and they're good enough to win the national championship.
Of course, we also need to talk about there was a little bit of controversy on one of Ohio State's touchdowns. Now, Clint, I will tell you, we were there in real time. In real time, it looked like a touchdown to me. Even watching the replays, I can understand why they ruled it a touchdown. The unfortunate thing is that I saw an interview with Ryan Day, and he even admitted at that point when there was some question on whether it was going to be a touchdown, he was wondering if this was, same old Ohio State versus Michigan again, which I kind of laughed at, right? So the one thing, it's one thing if Michigan had ended up losing by 4 or 5 points. That touchdown didn't make the difference. I would have liked to have seen it called back, just because I can only imagine the meltdown that Ryan Day would have had. To lose a touchdown at that point, and potentially lose the possession of the ball. So again, what I keep coming back to is, I'm watching this game, and it's one thing to lose to Oklahoma, it's one thing to lose to USC, to come up short in the 12th game of the season. And you mentioned that Bryce is a freshman, right? And we've talked about this in the podcast. He got a ton of snaps during the spring because of injuries at the quarterback position. He was the man from game one, which was kind of surprising. I think initially we expected he was going to get mixed in. And a few weeks ago, Sharon had said, he's not a freshman anymore. And this game reminded me that he's still a freshman. And that's not a knock on him. It's just an observation.
Yeah, he had made a lot of great corrections after the second bye week. He definitely looked calmer in the pocket on the road against Maryland, no doubt. And that did give me some optimism heading into the Ohio State game. But, the core of the work that we saw from Bryce Underwood this season was still, young, inexperienced, a little bit jittery in the pocket, and it affected him. It's okay, right? It is the facts of what happened. And again, I have all of the confidence in the world that he's going to springboard forward here. And for folks that have been a little bit down on Bryce's performance this season, again, JJ McCarthy has an argument to, perhaps be the best quarterback statistically or from an execution standpoint in Michigan's history. Certainly Jim Harbaugh would make that argument that it's JJ McCarthy. And somebody go ahead and make the comparison of J.J. McCarthy's freshman season to Bryce Underwood's freshman season, right? J.J. didn't earn the starting job. It was Cade McNamara in 2021. And when you compare the 2021 offense with the 2025 offense, there is there's only a shade of difference in favor of the 2021 offense. They scored more points per game, had about 50 more yards per game, and ran about 8 more plays per game. But success rate, 47% to 45%. Yards per play, exactly tied, 6.4 each. Points per trip inside the 40, 4.9 to 4.3, right? You're in the ballpark. He's right there right now. This offense is right there next to the 2021 offense, probably one tick behind it. And that's the level that is the level that we were hoping that Michigan could play at. But in terms of the 2021 Michigan Ohio State game, the biggest difference is that defense from Ohio State was soft. That defense is the reason that Ohio State was called Charmin soft for 4 straight years. It all started with that 2021 defense. It's not the same defense anymore. They might be the best defense in the country in 2025. So Michigan's going to have to find a way to elevate their game on both sides of the ball for sure, but especially on offense. And that's where you're excited about having a true freshman quarterback, because the biggest jump is going to be from year 1 to year 2. The guy that we see next year is going to be totally different than the guy we saw this year.
Let's hope, and I do agree. So, and I think the other thing, just if you think about it, even when JJ was playing, right, when it was the JJ Cade question, they had a rock solid offensive line. They had tools around them. And I think that's the thing that really overwhelmed me as I was watching this game is that, if Michigan was going to be a run first team, and it definitely looked like that was the game plan coming in, to have Jordan Marshall get injured definitely, didn't help things. So you really got the impression that it's like, well, what's going to happen now? And then we also have to talk about that, the Michigan defense was not able to get to the Ohio State quarterback. And it was really frustrating because, you could see it that somehow they had dialed up protection. And no matter what Wink Martindale did, there was no way to get to him. And, I've watched the game. Yes, there was a fair amount of holding. There's always a fair amount of holding. I've read online that, Ohio State got the benefit of the doubt. Listen, there's always a lot of holding in this game. There's a lot of holding anytime you watch a football game. Michigan was not able to dial up a way to put the Ohio State quarterback under pressure. And if you think about it, he threw an interception early in the game. If you can get him back on his heels, if you can give him happy feet, maybe this is a completely different game. But the only happy feet I saw was with Bryce Underwood, and just the Michigan offense was never able to catch gear. For me, that was the story of the game. The story of the game was that the Michigan offense just didn't show up. And listen, I want to give a lot of credit to Ohio State. They're a great team, okay? And yet, Oklahoma was able to do a very similar thing to Michigan. USC was able to do a very similar thing. And that's, to me, what's really disappointing in this. And I'm not saying that every team can do that to Michigan, but it is a consistent theme that Michigan, the offense, can get put back on its heels, and it never really finds gear in the second half. So I think, for me, it's the overall pattern in the losses that's disappointing. And, of course, to see it at home against Ohio State, the reality was that we joked in that 21 game that Ohio State doesn't like to play in the weather. Well, it wasn't supposed to snow till after the game. Snow dialed up. I mean, it had all the conditions for Michigan to surge. Everything seemed to be going their way. The opportunity was there, and when they were given the moment, they just couldn't find a way to perform.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And defensively, again, I put a little bit of the defensive struggle on the offense. I think complementary football is a big deal there, especially in cold weather games. But the bigger question I had initially was, again, rotation. There was the last drive of the first half would have been really, really big for Michigan to get a stop. And for whatever reason, Zeke Berry was not out there. And I understand, getting young guys playing time getting your depth guys playing time, but I just did not understand that particular moment being the one where you're going to take Zeke Berry, your starting corner, off the field. And the backup got attacked on two big chunk plays to kind of let Ohio State off of their own goal line. I thought that was a mistake, plain and simple. And from a larger perspective, you know, what I remember most from the national championship season is how often you and I were just amazed at the strong, positive culture around the Michigan program, to be able to block out all of that noise and to still execute and stay positive and stay focused on the task at hand was remarkable. And for as much credit as we gave the culture in that season, I think there are problems that we see with the culture currently that need to be addressed. I think there's got to be accountability for guys that are not executing well. I think there's got to be accountability for the coaches um, who didn't show any development, under their responsibility. But you had a captain on the defense walk away from the team, like kind of unexpectedly or inexplicably. And I don't understand how that happens, right? It's a personal choice. Ernest Hausman, I'm sure, you know, uh, he's a grown man. He's going to make his own decisions. But I can't imagine that happening just 2 seasons ago, right? I don't understand how somebody who was elected captain just goes MIA for 2 games at the end of the season, especially the Ohio State game. It's again, we don't know the whole story. I certainly don't know the whole story. I don't want to, cast aspersions on any player or anything, but from a larger culture perspective, I can't imagine that happening on the better teams that we've seen at Michigan. And somehow, I think Sharon Moore's going to have to find which levers to pull, both personnel and processes and whatever else he can tweak in order to address these problems with the culture, because these right now are major leaks in the program to me.
Well, and the question is, we've talked a lot about the culture that Jim Harbaugh installed, and the question for me is, and I've been thinking about this for a few seasons, is the system and the culture that Jim Harbaugh created so dependent on him that he can't be replaced? Okay? And that's not a slam on him. It's an observation, okay? And you think back to the impact that Bo Schembechler had on the Michigan program. There's a statue of him outside of Schembechler Hall. It's called Schembechler Hall. The team, the team, the team. All these things echoed down well past when he retired, right? And indeed, one of the reasons that Jim Harbaugh was brought back is he was a disciple of Bo. So my question when Jim came and was here for as long as he was he able to create a similar culture that would survive him? And we've heard the players talk in the last 2 seasons about the culture, but it seems to me that it's a hollow shell of what it was when Jim was here. And it's going to be up to Sharon Moore to save what he can, preserve what he can of Jim's culture, but to create a new culture. Because like you said, you had a player walk away, right? And we don't know what happened. There's lots of rumors on the internet, but it's not an injury. Injuries happen, okay? And, I think back to Max Bredesen, right? Max Bredesen got injured versus Maryland, and he came out Ohio State week on a little scooter, on, one of the little scooters because he'd hurt his leg. And he's just went on and on about, man, I'll be out there if there's any way, right? And he was dressed, but he didn't get on the field. But Max Bredesen wouldn't walk away. And a lot of these other players wouldn't walk away. We've talked about Gio El-Hadi, and Gio did not have a great early season. He rallied toward the end, but he was going to be out there, Okay. And again, that's what you want in a captain. So I really think that one of the things that Michigan needs to do as a program is consider how NIL has changed things. It's part of the new reality. I very much support it, but it has changed things. And what kind of a culture is going to grow up in the place and replace the thing that was here that Jim created? And and I will tell you, Clint, I love Jim, but I really thought that I'm not surprised that the culture doesn't exist after him. He is such a unique guy. He is a unique person, right? So it doesn't surprise me. But I am disappointed that Sharon hasn't been able to um, grow something else in its place. And I think back to just over a year ago. Okay, Michigan was struggling, beating Ohio State and flipping Bryce Underwood from LSU erased a lot of stains from that first season. Definitely gave us a lot of things to be excited for this season. Well, we see this season, and again, Bryce is a freshman, but the story last season was, well, we don't have a lot of talent at quarterback, right? Have a lot of heart with those guys, but not a lot of talent. Well, now we got a lot of talent, but we don't have a lot of experience. And I believe, I'm going to be consistent. Whenever we get a new coach, it's after the third year that you judge them. The third year, you kind of know if things are ascending or descending, and you kind of have a feel for how things are going. And I will not say that Sharon's on the hot seat. I don't think that's fair, but I can see it from where we are right now. And it's definitely a conversation that will come up next year. And it's going to be a pretty brutal schedule next year. I mean, think back. One of the things this year is Michigan had a very favorable schedule, which is one of the reasons that even while struggling on offense, they were probably one more win away from being in the college football playoff discussion, which, next year they're really going to have to come out gunning and rolling because they will not have the luxury of the schedule that we had this year. So I think there's going to be a lot of cultural things. And also, you have the last remnants of the Harbaugh leaders leaving. Okay. Max Bredesen will be gone. Gio Alhadi will be gone. Those glue guys who can tell the stories. And, Max Bredesen roomed with Bryce during spring camp and fall camp. And hey, I'm going to teach him about how to prepare and, kind of show him how we do things around here at Michigan. Well, now it's going to be time for a new crop of leaders. And one of the questions that I've had about Bryce, okay, is one of the things that JJ did is he helped create the culture, he helped recruit, he helped bring guys in, okay? He was definitely a leader in the locker room, whether he was a captain or not. And I think that's what I need to see from Bryce Underwood.
And all accounts that I've heard, I think Bryce is in that same mold in terms of leadership and recruiting, and certainly his talent is attracting, um, young receivers. I know Michigan just finished up their early signing period, and there were a couple wide receiver flips, away from SEC schools that never ever would have happened in the past, in the pre NIL era and pre Bryce Underwood. So I think all of those things are looking up. And for Sharon Moore, first of all, I don't think that it's necessarily a fair comparison to even compare the Michigan tenures from Harbaugh to Sharon Moore, for sure. And it's definitely not the right comparison to take Sharon Moore's first 2 seasons and compare them to the last 4 for Jim Harbaugh, right? So at the minimum, you got to go back to the beginning of Harbaugh's tenure and those first 2 seasons and compare it now to Sharon Moore. And I'll tell you, the first season under Harbaugh, 2015, felt like this season, 2025. That team was not, their record was better than I think the team skill set was. That 10-2 Michigan team was fortunate to be 10-2, right? And I think that this team was somewhat fortunate in terms of scheduling to be 9-3. right? So they're within a game of each other. I think those are comparable seasons. The really bad 2024 season under Sharon Moore really lines up pretty closely to the third season under Harbaugh, 2017, when John O'Korn had to take over a quarterback. Very similar dynamics on offense and a really dominant defense. So if next year Sharon Moore produces a team that is anywhere on the level of that 2016 team under Harbaugh, that was a terrible call by an official in Columbus, away from probably being in the 14 playoff. I think that you're right there where you need to be for a Michigan program in your third year under Sharon Moore. But that's a high standard. That 2016 Michigan team was really, really historically great, especially on defense. So there's a lot of work to get from here to there, but the talent on the roster is mostly young. They're losing a lot of experience in some key spots, but the offensive line is going to continue to get better with young guys. There are more young guys that didn't get to play this year that are going to step forward next year and be ready to contribute. And another batch of young wide receivers coming in to kind of supplement what you've got with Andrew Marsh. And, the current running backs have some decisions to make. I think it's still possible that Justice Haynes sticks around for another season. Maybe he declares for the draft and continues to rehab. But you're going to have Jordan Marshall, and you've got a 5-star freshman coming in behind him as well. So you're going to have at least 2 really, really talented running backs, and maybe even 3 again next year. So the pieces are there. I think if you were to compare those seasons to the beginning of Harbaugh's tenure, like I mentioned, then you can see that there's a similar foundation. But Sharon Moore's got to show that he's got the ability, to make tough decisions, part ways with coaches that are not getting it done, and continue to build on his foundation, but still be willing to change certain things in the program that maybe are gonna kind of unlock some additional potential for these players in the new era of college football.
Well, definitely agree with everything you're saying. And listen, I know that Michigan didn't really peak until after COVID under Harbaugh, right? Really, those last 3 seasons under Harbaugh, the 21, 22, and 23 season, everything just came up just amazing. And I'm not asking for that. I'm not expecting that, right? But I think that the dynamic right now is different in that with the expansion of the playoffs, if you look back at Harbaugh's first couple seasons, 3 out of those 4 years, he probably makes the playoffs in the expanded model, right? And for me, that's kind of the new mark. You and I have talked about, is the Big Ten, you and I have talked about, is there really any need for the Big Ten championship game anymore, right? And I'm not saying that there's not value in winning the Big Ten, but is there value in that game? And I'm not sure, because basically with the expansion of the playoffs, you go to that game, one more loss only bruises your resume for the playoffs. So, like, if things had been different this year, if Michigan had somehow beaten Ohio State, I'm perfectly fine with them not going to the Big Ten championship game, because I think a 2-loss Michigan, the name brand recognition, gives them a very good argument for going to the college football playoffs. And for me, that's kind of where we're at right now. Is it would have been overachieving this season to make the playoffs and to not do well, right? But to make it, that would have been overachieving. For me, next year, that's the bar. Okay, you got to make it. By hook or by crook, you got to make the college football playoffs. And if that doesn't happen, and I want to be clear, it's increasingly more difficult because the Big Ten's stacked, right? The Big Ten is definitely making an argument to be the preeminent conference in the United States in college football. So it's it's not back in the day where you could just pencil Michigan in for one or two losses. So with the Big Ten being tough, I still have the expectation of, hey, 12 teams make the college football playoffs. That means you're in the top 12. You got to be there. Okay, and for me, that's the minimum bar that I'm going to be looking at next season.
Yeah, and the schedule makes it certainly tough. Of course, they're going to play Ohio State. I think they're going to play Oregon. I think they play Indiana, the three Big Ten teams that are going to be in the playoff this year. So they're going to have to play championship level football, and it's going to have to be early in the season. I think I think Indiana is the fourth or fifth game of the season. So you're going to have to be ready to play the championship level in September and October next season. There's no ramp up time. So that means the work that is necessary has to start right now in this bowl prep and then straight into winter conditioning and spring ball. So the season for next year is absolutely starting right now. And anybody that's pouting and moping is not helping themselves and not helping the program. There's a lot of work to do to get to the level they need to get to for next year. It's possible, but it's got to start right now.
So again, looking next year, right? You have Indiana as the fourth game of the season, and then you look at the tail end of the season, and you're at Oregon and at Ohio State. Oh my, right? Two tough games. But when you look at the schedule, Michigan has Oklahoma again, right? Then they have Indiana, Iowa, Penn State comes back on, UCLA comes back on, Oregon, Ohio State. I mean, tough schedule, and there's going to be less room for error than this year. And it's one of the reasons this year I was kind of disappointed and projecting that Michigan might make the college football playoffs is that it was a very favorable schedule. We didn't know how good Oklahoma was going to be. I think Oklahoma turned out to be a little better than I thought. I believe they could have beaten USC, but again, came out and kind of disappeared in the second half. So next year, you're not going to have the luxury of the schedule. Now, the other advantage they do have is they get more home games next year. So that will help, but we definitely need to see more consistency. So, Clint, the question I have for you is, do you have a feel for what kind of offense that Sharon Moore wants to run?
Yeah, Sharon Moore, I think, is still the main architect of the Michigan run game, right? And he's kind of a descendant of Harbaugh's school of thought that, a little bit of zone, a little bit of gap scheme, but in general, you want to use formations, shifts, and motions to try to get the defense to break their own rules and not be gap sound. So there's a lot of highly intelligent X's and O's stuff that's going on in the run game, but it's still going to come down to is is the offensive line going to be able to smash and move the defensive lines that they play against next year, and that remains to be seen. How Chip Lindsey, the reason he got brought in as the offensive coordinator this year is because he has a long history of adapting his passing game to different styles of run game. So he is flexible in that he can say, all right, let's start with what you want to do in the run game. So Sharon didn't have to change his run game fundamentals. And Chip Lindsey is going to adapt his passing game to that. And I think a little bit more RPO than we've seen in the past. We saw this year, but it's certainly going to be more as Bryce Underwood continues to grow and mature and trust his eyeballs a little bit more. So once he's more capable of making more reads and reading a defense before the snap and changing the play, as he becomes more mature, the offense is going to have many different options that it can go to. So we saw a very basic version of what the offense is going to be, and we're going to see more flexibility in what it can be in the future. And that is totally dependent on how quickly Bryce Underwood can progress mentally, not physically.
So that's the question that I have. is I hope you're right. I'm I'm wondering, and I when I look at the way the difference between this season's offense and last year's offense, um, I'm wondering what next season would look like optimally, right? And I'm wondering, does it mean that, like, in a perfect world, okay, and let's talk about next year. Next year, Bryce has more experience. I think we're going to see him run more. I think we're going to see him run more next year, right? Um, I'm disappointed that we didn't see, I was all wound up heading into this game that we were going to finally see him uncork just a long pass, right? And we didn't see it. And I think to me, that's the disappointing thing is that I'm trying to figure out if you go all year without throwing really long passes downfield, where does a quarterback like Bryce Underwood fit, right? And I come back to, well, he needs to run more. Well, then you expose him more to more damage. So, but we did that with JJ. So I guess I'm doing a lot of pondering on what I expect the offense to look like next year.
Yeah, the question about whether and how much Bryce is going to run the ball is really about who steps into that number 2 quarterback spot. If the if Sharon Moore and Chip Lindsey are comfortable with the backup quarterback having to, take some of the load off of Bryce Underwood, then I think you can run him 3, 4, 5 times a game. And if he gets dinged up, it's okay. You've got another quarterback who is viable for a series, or if you have to start him against a lower end opponent, you feel like you're still safe. And clearly, Sharon Moore did not feel that he had that luxury this year. I think the feeling was that if Bryce Underwood would have gone down this year with an injury, that the offense would have reverted back to 2024, and we know that wouldn't have been acceptable, and there would have been probably 2 or 3 more football games this year that Michigan doesn't win if Bryce Underwood had been hurt, had been injured and out. So um, whether they want to run quarterback run plays or any kind of read option or get him out on the edge where he's got the option to throw the ball deep or run depending on what the defense gives him, a lot of that is going to be on the development of the depth of the quarterback room. And that's going to be really, really important to keep an eye on, probably as we go through spring ball and into the spring game.
So the question that I have, Clint, is so, and really it all rotates around the offense. It's all right. So you need to have great receivers to have somewhere for Bryce to throw to. I think it's really hard to recruit on your resume of your passing attack the last 2 years. Trust us, we're going to throw more, right? Haven't seen it. So I think they need to do that to get that complementary nature on the offense. But I do think that if I'm recruiting against Michigan, I'm definitely pointing out that we really don't throw the ball effectively too much. So definitely want to see that. Definitely, exciting. Lots of questions, right? And when you look at the stats, and Marsh did not have one reception, right? So here we're in the last couple games, really felt like that Bryce and Marsh were finding something, right? Ohio State just took him completely out of the game. But I'm not sure if they took him out of the game or that Bryce took himself out of the game. Because like you said, he had happy feet. There were plays to be made. There was meat on the bone. And again, I'm not putting the whole loss on him. I'm saying that it's disappointing that I still question um, like I was so dejected at halftime in that game. Okay, and I come back to that. Really, it was 10-9, right? 10-9. That's definitely doable. Although it had been all Michigan momentum, it was 10-9. And soon as the scoreboard flipped to 17-9 with 16 seconds before half, and then Ohio State was getting the ball, that uh, that gap seemed large, larger than it should have. And I really felt that again, we can talk about how the defense let the offense kind of hang out to dry, but again, you know, 3 field goals. Okay, 3 field goals. You're not going to win many games like that. You're not going to win many rivalry games like that. So I keep saying you can't win if you can't score. So I'm looking forward to how they're going to mix Bryce in. And as you said, there's a lot to be excited about. It looks like Michigan's going to have a fairly solid offensive line next year. Um, we got to see how the transfer portal goes and NIL goes, but it looks like the tumbler should come up pretty well for the offense next year, and I think I really need to see that.
I would compare this offense to the 2021 offense, because that was J.J. McCarthy's freshman year, and Cade McNamara won the starting job that year. I just took a peek at the stats in comparison, and Cade McNamara played one half of one more game, plus the Big Ten championship. So he played another game and a half and had 34 more pass attempts than Bryce Underwood has right now. So they threw the ball the same amount with Cade McNamara, who was pass only, no run option at all. And again, so this current version of the offense is at its core, it is in the right shape. It is good enough to set the foundation for what it needs to grow into next year and especially in 2027. So Bryce Underwood is capable of making everything that he needs to be able to do physically. It's about experience and confidence and being able to slow the game down from snap to snap. And then your offensive coordinator can give him more options both pre-snap and post-snap. But right now, the playbook just has to be a little bit simplified for where Bryce Underwood was as a freshman. So it's really again, we hit the ceiling on this team in 2025. I think this team got almost all that you were going to get out of this particular set of circumstances, especially with some key injuries. I think they should have played better against USC, but that game wasn't particularly close. They had a lot of chances to win the Oklahoma game, but they still ended up down, 2 scores, even though Oklahoma played pretty poorly. And, they had a chance to be up 2 full scores on Ohio State and kind of put doubt into their mind, like Ryan Day had said, and they just didn't get it done. I think 9 wins was about all we were going to get out of this particular team, given the rest of the circumstances. So they've got to do a lot of work to improve in order to get to that 10 or 11 win mark against a much tougher schedule next year.
So the biggest question I have is what's going to be the new culture, right? Because I'll tell you, Clint, when Harbaugh was here, the players talked about culture a lot. He spoke about culture a lot. It was not you probably heard about it every session, right? This year, when players talked about culture, it was almost an afterthought. Oh, yeah, and we have a great culture, right? And I'm not saying that they don't have a great culture. What I am saying is I have not seen the greatness on the field yet. And I think that's what the biggest thing that I need to see from Bryce. The biggest thing I need to see from Bryce is if you're going to be a leader, you need to lead on the field as well with performance. And that is fully what I'm expecting, and that's what I'm hoping to see next season.
Yeah, I think that remains true. And I on defense, who are your leaders coming back, right? Who is going to step forward into that leadership role? Again, I have more questions than answers at the end of the season, and that's not a great place to be. Losing Hausman at the end of the season, making me kind of question who is really the leader in that locker room on the defensive side of the ball. That's another big question that I'm interested in trying to answer, both bowl prep, their bowl game, and the performance, and then into the spring. So who is going to emerge in the middle of that defense, and then kind of at all three levels: the defensive backfield, the linebacker room, and up front on the D line.
All right. Well, I agree. We'll be here to watch what happens. I think there's definitely a lot of intrigue going on right now. Going to see where Michigan is going to play their bowl game, who's going to come back, and this is the time of year where they really need those practices to kind of settle things down. So I think we're gonna have a lot to think and talk about before next season. The thing that gets me though is that so I was at Northwestern, at Wrigley, and I really thought in that game that Bryce really showed maturity in getting Michigan into position for the game-winning field goal. And I just thought, oh, it clicked. It just clicked. So we know he can do it. He's just going to need to show us doing it, in bigger games, and he's going to have a lot of opportunities next season.
Yeah, it starts in the off-season workouts, right? That's where leaders are made. Are during bowl prep here coming up, and then right into the weight room in January and February. Those guys need to step forward. Every single position room needs a leader, but then also the offensive unit, the defensive unit, and the upperclassmen. They have to decide what they want next season to be, and then put the work in and take 130 other guys with them. That's what the next phase of the program is. They have to get, probably 2 or 3 notches better than they were this year in order to play at a championship level.
So we've already seen some changes start. Michigan is going to have a different special teams coordinator, and I never want to see somebody let go, but can definitely understand. You and I were both pretty big critics of special teams this season. Do you expect any more changes, Clint? What's your expectation?
I think there's always attrition, right? I don't know who it is. I don't have any inside sources by any means, but there's always some changeover, and usually it kind of kicks into high gear after this early signing day has passed, and then certainly once the bowl game's over. So there's probably a move or two that happens in the month of December, then probably another move or two that happens in January, and then we'll see how they come together and what tweaks are going to start getting made as they get into spring practices. So I don't think there's going to be any major overhaul. The special teams coordinator, I think, was pretty clear cut. There are questions about how the defense is going to revamp, but if Wink Martindale wants to stay on staff, I think that he will be welcome. I don't think that Sharon's going to fire Wink Martindale. I think he's just going to have to kind of tighten the screws in some areas of his scheme and his ability to teach it to younger players in order for Michigan really to maximize what they can do on defense. So I'm okay if he's still around, but the defense does have some issues that they need to clean up. If Wink Martindale does move on, then that would be instantly the number one storyline for me is where are they going to go on defense? Are they going to promote from within, or are they going to try to find somebody else outside that maybe came from that Ravens tree or now in Seattle with Mike McDonald, or maybe in Los Angeles with Jesse Minter? So a lot of questions, but all of that probably doesn't really start coming to the surface until after the bowl game's done.
Well, we'll have a lot to watch for and a lot to talk about as Michigan heads into the bowl season. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
Yeah, they just played better. They executed better. We didn't play good enough. We didn't execute enough, and they did when it mattered, and they played a better game. Yeah, not good, right? I mean, it stings. Everybody stings. You sting for the seniors, you sting for the program. Uh, when you're in this 24/7, when you're in this for 365, this hurts, and you work tirelessly to make this, be successful. So, not just about me. It's really about the kids and all the hard work in. So, I'll put it on me. I always put stuff on me and self-reflect, self-look at, and see what we need to fix and see what we need to do. But it's got to be better. I mean, you got, we'll look at the film and see exactly what it is. But you don't want this feeling again. So, 364 days a year, working, figure out ways to figure out to win this game, along with all the other games we're going to play. But we got another game we got to play after this. So we got to regroup and try to get 10 wins. That'll be a huge success for this team to get 10 wins with such a young team. Starting 6 freshmen, redshirt freshman, true freshman quarterback, redshirt freshman running back, 3 redshirt freshman offensive linemen. So we got to regroup as a team and make sure we do that.
Thank you for listening to the umgoblue.com podcast. All rights reserved.